It started off as black men coming together to make decisions about what they could possibly do to make the community better. The driving forces were probably Ambrose Lane and Arthur O. Eve. Ambrose Lane at that time was the director of the CAO, Community Action Organization. He was its first director, and it was through his efforts that the Black Development Foundation was created, because a lot of the federal money that was funneled through the community came through and helped to create something called the CAO, the Community Action Organization. And almost everything else flowed from that beginning as other kind of organizations came into place, especially something that was concerned with what the community saw as a real need, some way to expand economic development. And that was the main goal and a mission of the Black Development Foundation, was to figure out ways to marshal skills and resources to increase the amount of black businesses in the community. And at that time it was thought that, since most economists say that more employment is created by small businesses than by big activities, we wanted to create as many small businesses as we could, okay? And the large number of men who came to the meetings and showed an interest gave us some enthusiasm to continue down that road and to see how much we could accomplish. At one time there was a dairy, Mr. White's Dairy, in the community. He was an older gentleman and he was ready to sell the business, and his preference was to sell it to somebody from the community. And the Black Development Foundation actually bought the dairy, and they also organized a daycare center over on Michigan Avenue. It was called the Cradle of Black Pearls, and they made funds available to other individuals who wanted to open their own businesses. They did some loans and grants to businesses, and this was how they were supposed to assist the community.
Mr. Smith, what are some of the problems that you people at BDF have found in setting up black businesses?
Well, we have found that, again, there is the existence of what could be called a dual or double standard. Many people going into business for the first time felt as though a prior good employment record, a good credit record, and a good business idea would be sufficient to get a bank to take a chance on them and loan them the money. But we found that this was not necessarily so, that sometimes the standards that our applicants had to deal with were more stringent than what we were led to believe were the general standards. We also found another interesting phenomenon, that very often when a major company would indicate all sorts of money was available for black development, when you went to apply, the answer was it's already been used up, even though you just heard the commercial on the radio or television 2 days before. The promises have not been consistently well received by our community, in that when you go to the source of the promise, you find that the situation is quite different than what you were led to believe when you were encouraged to develop your program so that you did become available to receive a business loan. So we have another situation where a double standard of judgment exists.
There was a general belief that the federal initiative was called the Small Business Association, did not use the same criteria in accepting or denying loans to black businesses as it did to other people making the application. So we thought we needed to have our own access to federal dollars and our own means to set the criteria and make loans to people in our community who wanted to go into business or wanted to expand existing businesses. So this was what we had in mind, and this was supposed to be the main thrust of the Black Development Foundation. We did other things, but development, that word development always meant economic and business development, okay? That was what they had in mind. There was one initial problem, and I was as much a part of the problem as anybody else. I became vice chairman of the Black Development Foundation, but I had no business and limited management experience. So I couldn't bring to the table the kind of skills that a experienced a businessman could have brought. Making a decision about the viability of a business was something that the board of directors did not have a lot of skill in doing. So some of our choices were more emotional than practical. There was no overall theory about what an evolving business population should be like, and what relationship they should have to the people they were serving and to the community at large. So we were sort of shooting from the hip in a sense. What later came to be known as a business plan was not something that we were that familiar with. You know, what a business plan was, what its function was, and how it related to the possible success of the business. We were not too much involved in this kind of planning at the time, okay? So a lot of us, I guess on the board of directors, you had some people who were active in unions, some people who were active in sociology, and instructors and educators, but very few with broad or detailed business experience. So that put us at a disadvantage. Also, there was something else that we did not realize until way late. Built into the whole federal mechanism was this idea of something being either a demonstration project or a project that should eventually have its own funding. We assumed that in terms of federal support, the funding would be there until such time as the business became viable. But every time we had a change of administration, there was a change of emphasis on how much they wanted to do for certain segments of the community. So we didn't really know that we would not be given a reasonable period of time to succeed. And because of that, we tried to get as many businesses developed as possible without thinking in terms of long-range survival for those businesses, which was supposed to be the basic goal of any economic development. It should be there, and it should be permanent, and it should be a expansive part of the black community. But this didn't particularly happen. I also begin to see that, as Jesse Nash often pointed out to us, there were two or three aspects of the war on poverty that did not have a sound philosophical or rational basis. One of the parts of the theory of federal funding was that if you gave the money to the people who were most oppressed and most denied, they would be the ones best able to take their funds and solve certain of their problems. What was missing in that theory, the people who were underprivileged and undereducated and lacking experience did not have any alternative means of getting experience and wisdom and training and skills. But we thought just having the money would be enough to enable us to make certain things happen. I ended up with the idea that skills is more important than money. Skills and experience is more important than money. You've got a better chance of succeeding if you have skills than if you have the money. Because if you have the skills, you may be able to plan your activity in such a way that the money will come. But if you don't have any skills and just the money, by the time you learn, you may have used up all the money. There was one fellow who was given money to open up a black supermarket. His name was Mr. West. I remember having a conversation with Mr. West, and he was talking about the federal government would make consultant money available to us. And he said, I was in business for 5 years before I even knew what to ask a consultant. Mr. West was a very talented artist, and he worked for the post office, but he didn't. That experience was not translated to the ability to run a supermarket. And he said, but he learned. He was a fast learner and a good learner, and he was way down the road before he knew even what kind of consulting services he needed, what he wanted to ask them, and what kind of an answer that would be useful to him once he got it. Okay, so it's like giving a child an automobile without teaching him how to drive. Well, by the time he learns how to drive, he may have wrecked half of the neighborhood. So the skills, I finally begin to believe that the skills must come first, and the money will pretty much take care of itself. And the best two examples of that are two successful businessmen of our own community, and one person was Mr. Jim Bell, who started off in a very small operation, learned and learned and learned until he ends up with a big operation. And all while he was learning at a smaller level, he was able to generate capital. He was able to develop a credit track record and get better and better at what he was doing. And the other guy is Herb Bellamy. Herb Bellamy did it almost a similar kind of way. Started off on a small scale, learned and studied where they were, grew from there, grew to the next logical step, the next economic level, and ended up having a gradual ladder of success that had to do with them starting with limited skills and limited money, but staying there until they had acquired more of both, more skills and more money, and then they moved to the next level. You have to think in terms of quality, you have to think in terms of skills, you have to think in terms of what constitutes what I call a functional circle, a large enough number of people where a consensus is possible and where you can work together, as opposed to a mass movement where you may have 1,000 people, but you haven't identified the mission and the goals necessary to accomplish that mission. So I think those are the kind of things that we did not know enough about during the Civil Rights era. But there are people out there working on these things now, which means any additional community effort might be better than what was attempted by the Black Development Foundation.